Ladies and gentlemen, here to perform the children's classic Row, Row, Row Your Boat, Michael McDonald.
Michael McDonald was the voice that changed the Doobie Brothers from a rock band into a smooth music sensation. Behind the catchy songs and big hits, there was tension. There were silent looks and unexpressed feelings, causing the band to struggle with their new direction. At 72, McDonald is finally sharing what happened when he joined the Doobies. His arrival affected the band's identity, and some paid the price. Let's explore this. Before becoming famous, Michael McDonald was just another session musician working behind the scenes. He grew up in St. Louis, playing local shows before moving to Los Angeles in the early 70s. There, he became a popular backup singer and keyboardist, catching the eye of the band Steely Dan. Touring with Steely Dan taught McDonald discipline and attention to detail, but it did not make him a star. That changed in 1975 during a medical emergency. Doobie Brothers lead singer Tom Johnston had a bleeding ulcer and could not perform during a tour. The band needed someone to take his place, and McDonald stepped in. What started as a temporary role turned transformative. McDonald's unique, soulful voice resonated with audiences, shifting the band's sound. Radio stations and their record label quickly noticed the change and backed McDonald. He began writing lead singles, including hits like Taking It to the Streets and Minute by Minute. These songs represented a significant change for the band, but not all members embraced this new direction. Internal conflicts arose, and much of that tension related to Michael McDonald. How McDonald's replaced the Doobie Brothers' original soul. Tom Johnston was the lead singer of the Doobie Brothers and a key band member. He had a distinct gravelly voice and a strong stage presence. He wrote their early hits like China Grove, Long Train Running, and Listen to the Music. But in 1975, everything changed. While on tour, Johnston collapsed due to exhaustion and internal bleeding. He was taken to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed him with ulcers caused by stress and constant touring. The Doobie Brothers had commitments, including booked venues and sold tickets. They needed a replacement quickly, so they brought in Michael McDonald. At first, this felt like a temporary fix. However, when Johnston returned, he noticed the band had shifted. McDonald's songs were becoming popular, and his voice led the new album's demos. The record label pushed for a more soulful sound. Decisions began to be made without Johnston. Although he had health issues, he realized the growing momentum around McDonald was sidelining him. He quietly left the band in 1977, citing health reasons, but many knew it was more about being pushed out. By 1978, the Doobie Brothers sounded very different. Synthesizers and McDonald's smooth vocals replaced their original bluesy style. The album, Minute by Minute, went multi-platinum, and What a Fool Believes won a Grammy for Song of the Year. The music industry praised them, but internally the band struggled. Fans who loved the earlier gritty sound felt confused by the softer direction. Longtime members like Jeff "Skunk" Baxter and John Hartman felt distanced musically. Most creative decisions revolved around McDonald, and rehearsals often felt like solo efforts. Backstage, tensions grew. They were not just touring, they were promoting McDonald's music. It wasn't personal, but it was noticeable. McDonald's voice had become the band's trademark. Some saw it as growth, while others viewed it as giving up. The term yacht rock emerged in the media, which cast a negative light on McDonald. It suggested slick music aimed at wealthy people, often seen as lacking depth. McDonald disliked the label, but it stuck. Although they continued to win awards, the band felt they were losing their identity. The Doobie Brothers felt more like Michael's project than a group effort. As the band transitioned into this new era, other changes affected them: contracts, financial arrangements, and rights to their songs. In the music world, loyalty can easily turn into legal disputes. When McDonald joined, he was seen as a temporary support. But as he produced hits, his role grew, and he gained more control. Meanwhile, the original members noticed their shares shrinking. Insiders noted that older members began seeing differences in dividing publishing checks. McDonald's name appeared more frequently, while others' names faded away. Losing songwriting credit meant losing control of the band's direction, royalties, and their identity. Some believe McDonald deserved his credits because he wrote the successful songs and helped save the band. Others felt it was a quiet takeover masked by contracts. Legal terms and pressures from the record label now influenced a band that once relied on friendship. They didn't publicly argue, but their silence spoke volumes. The agreements were signed, and so was the change in power. How McDonald's perfectionism fractured the Doobie Brothers sound. In the studio, everything was polite, professional, cordial even. But underneath the harmonies and pristine production, there was a split. Two visions for one band. McDonald's style leaned inward. He layered lush chord progressions, leaned into melancholy, and sought perfection. Every note had to be immaculate. It was less about jamming and more about sculpting. The sound shifted from communal to curate. Band members who once played off each other in real time now waited for their part to be added later, often pieced together by McDonald and producer Ted Templeman. Older members, especially those who thrived in the gritty live-take ethos, felt sidelined. The energy that once sparked in early Doobie albums was gone, replaced by a chill professionalism. The sessions for Minute by Minute were the turning point. McDonald was no longer the new guy. He was the axis. His meticulousness brought acclaim, but also fatigue. Some bandmates didn't show up. Others played their parts and left like studio musicians. Nobody said it outright, but everyone knew. This wasn't the Doobie Brothers anymore. This was Michael McDonald, and the rest were orbiting. It was 1980, backstage at a tour stop in Cincinnati. Tensions had been simmering for months. Missed rehearsals, short tempers, passive-aggressive comments buried beneath professionalism. But on that night, something snapped. Accounts vary, but the story goes like this. A disagreement over the set list turned into a shouting match. Not between McDonald and an outsider, but between McDonald and founding drummer John Hartman. Hartman accused him of turning the band into a solo act with backup singers. McDonald, usually reserved, didn't back down. Other bandmates stepped in to cool things down, but the damage was done. What had once been subtle resentment now had a voice. That night, Hartman packed his gear and didn't return for the rest of the tour. He wasn't officially fired. He just left, like others would soon after. The band finished the tour, but the dynamic had shifted irreparably. On stage, they still smiled and played the hits, but behind the scenes, loyalty had fractured. McDonald didn't want to fight. He wasn't trying to destroy a legacy, but by just being himself, by doing what he was best at, he'd changed the band's DNA. That night in Cincinnati was never in the press, but it marked the beginning of the end for those inside the circle. Why McDonald walked away from his Doobie Brothers empire. By 1981, Michael McDonald was tired of being the frontman of the Doobie Brothers. He felt the pressure of carrying the band's creative weight and the exhaustion from the endless touring. What had once elevated him now felt like a trap. He quietly suggested to the band that they take a break to find their roots again. However, the record label wanted more hits like Minute by Minute, more ballads, and more of his voice. McDonald had started working on solo music. He wanted to create freely, without the burden of expectations tied to the Doobie Brothers. He remained loyal to the band, but was unsure if they would accept his solo work. The other band members noticed his feelings. They had seen it before. Artists looking for a way out. Ironically, the person who almost broke the band now wished to leave. When he did finally depart, it was quiet, no dramatic split or press releases, just a simple goodbye. The years after, the Doobie Brothers became a nostalgia act, reuniting for tours and TV appearances. McDonald would sometimes join them again. His voice had aged, but it was still recognizable. On stage, it seemed like there was forgiveness and harmony. However, behind the scenes, there was silence. McDonald rarely talked about past tensions in interviews. He would say, "Every band has its ups and downs," deflecting the questions. In contrast, some members like Jeff Baxter and Tom Johnston hinted at issues, with Johnston saying, "We were a rock band until we weren't." Offstage, the band worked and traveled separately. Even press events were carefully planned to avoid overlap. There was no public conflict, but they were not close either, just professional. Fans wanted to believe that old wounds had healed and the band was back together. The reality was more complicated. Some wounds had scabbed over, while others were still open. Although they played their songs and smiled for the cameras, there was a distance between them, reflecting a silence between people who had once greatly impacted each other's lives, but had since moved on. Regrets revealed. McDonald's emotional confession after 50 years of silence. Michael McDonald took 5 decades to share his truth. It was not through a big headline or book tour when he finally did. Instead, he spoke in a podcast interview shortly after turning 72. He talked slowly and carefully, focusing on regret rather than blame. He reflected on how unprepared he was for his role in the Doobie Brothers. He never intended to lead the band. He didn't know how to say no. "I was filling in," he said, "and suddenly I wasn't. I became the thing I thought I was helping to hold together." He acknowledged that he stayed silent as others stepped back. He felt guilt about how the band changed around him and sometimes wished he had left sooner. Not out of disrespect, but out of respect for what the band had been before he joined. This was not a shocking confession, nor was it bitter. It was a man, now older, looking back at a life shaped by chance and unforeseen events. McDonald did not ask for forgiveness. He shared his truth for the first time, which changed how we view everything about the band. He saved the band. He also created division within it. He took them to the Grammys and moved them away from their roots. Michael McDonald was not born a Doobie Brother. He never fully became one for many fans. Unlike Tom Johnston or the original lineup, he represented a different era, sound, and identity. But perhaps that's the point. McDonald was never meant to be a savior. He was meant to be a temporary solution. Instead, he became the most recognizable member of a band that didn't realize it was changing until it was too late. And maybe that's why it worked, and why it ultimately broke. His voice became legendary. His time with the band was controversial. His legacy is complex. Regardless of whether you love him or resent him, Michael McDonald transformed the Doobie Brothers into something unforgettable. He did this not by accident or force, but by doing what no one else could. Michael McDonald didn't just join the Doobie Brothers. He changed their path forever. His voice brought fame, but also division. The story behind this transformation was never as smooth as the music might suggest. If this truth surprised you, subscribe for more untold legacies. The past is never finished.